maybe that natural lull in the noise, signifies the time to start. Welcome everybody to our panel, Pregnancy in the Limelight. My name is Jason Barker and I am the chair. And we've got Sally Hines as the roving Michael, as you called yourself. And so what I'm going to do is just allow our panellists to introduce themselves first, and then we've got some more general themes we're going to talk about. And then I'd like to do the 5-minute chat and then the questions towards the end. Right, so can I start to introduce yourself, please, with Thomas Beatie?
Hey, thank you, and thanks for having me. It means a lot to be welcomed out to the UK to speak on the subject matter. I'm Thomas Beatie, and I know you folks pronounce my name differently out here. It's actually Irish and Scottish. Yeah, but...
Warren Beattie is Warren Beattie.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Thomas Beatie.
Yeah, and this is my daughter, Susan. She's my firstborn. She's 11, and this is her big daddy-daughter trip. You know, and I also have 3 others. I have 3 other sons. I have Austin, Jensen, and Jackson. Jackson is now 1, and I don't know if you've heard about me, but I'm the guy that broke the seal on pregnancy, and it's been a tough journey. You know, I have to say, I wouldn't redo anything at all, because I have the family that I've always wanted. I'm the father I've always wanted to be. I'm the husband I've always wanted to be. And everything I did, all the micro movements and decisions I've made to this point has resulted in having this right here, a family. And I realized it wasn't the most conventional way to start a family. And it was a little bit of a bumpy ride and landing. But I'm so glad that we've gotten to this point. You know, we're talking about it. The conversation has started. Here we are. There's lots of guys to talk to, and everyone with their individual stories are coming forward. And I think that's extremely important to the world. I think the world needs to realize that we're people too, and we have the right to have our own families. And that's why I'm here.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Thomas. Yuval Topper-Erez.
Yes.
Okay. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I would.
So yes, I'm Yuval. I'm 32 and I have 3 kids. Leary, who's 8, Aria, who's almost 6, and Tegan, who we call Tig, who is 8 months old. My first 2 I had in Israel. I actually was the first pregnant man in Israel, and I did get quite a lot of public attention, which I'll probably talk about. Well, which is what I'm here to talk about. And then Tig I had here, and I had quite different experiences, having them in different countries. Also, in many ways, also being the first and not being the first, and the medical treatment I got, and society's reaction to me, the public interest, or actually here not so much interest, and registration. Yeah, I guess my fertility story began 12 years ago when I started taking testosterone, and I was told that within a year I could forget about having biological kids, which was very difficult, but I knew I needed to transition at the time to survive. But a few months after I started transitioning, I heard about Thomas Beatie. And that really changed things for me, because I didn't know, I mean, he was the first one I heard about, I didn't know there were many more, so I didn't know if it was unusual that he managed to get pregnant after a few years on testosterone, but I knew it definitely wasn't absolutely not possible like I was told. And that really opened the door for me, but I didn't want to wait too long, because I thought, as so many of us were told that testosterone damages fertility, that I thought I'd better wait as least possible, so I was on testosterone just under 3 years when I stopped and had my first. And since then we've obviously realised that there's very little evidence, if any at all, that testosterone damages fertility. And I managed to get pregnant with no problem at all after, 10 years on and off testosterone with my first. I also had miscarriage in the middle, but maybe we can touch that later. That was also here, so I actually had 2 pregnancies in Israel and 2 pregnancies here.
Thank you. And Freddy McConnell, who is a filmmaker, a journalist, and also the star of The Seahorse, which is, sorry, did that make you cringe? Because I said star, I'm sorry. God, I get it all wrong. Also the protagonist of the Seahorse film, which is showing later tonight, be about 8 o'clock. So, Freddy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. So I'm a journalist and a writer and hopefully soon to be podcaster. But I decided to document or put a team around me to help document my experience of my pregnancy with my son, who is turning 2 this week. And yeah, maybe it's helpful to sort of give a bit of backstory as well of stuff that isn't in the film. So I came out as trans when I was at university, which would have been sort of in my mid-30s, and I remember going to Charing Cross Gender Clinic and being asked to sign a consent form, which is probably similar to a consent form that lots of people here and probably even still today are still being asked to sign, which had a clause at the bottom about becoming infertile. And I think it was quite vaguely worded, but definitely felt like a definite thing. And there was no going back, and I think we'd had one very brief chat about freezing gametes, but it was with this kind of attitude of like, well, you're probably not going to do this, and it's very expensive, and why would you want to anyway, because you're a bloke, and that kind of thing. So I felt like I was just thinking about it by myself, and I had very briefly considered trying to get pregnant before transitioning. I'd always grown up in a environment where my mum, especially, if you've seen Seahorse, you'll know she's very supportive, and she always sort of wanted me to bear in mind that if I could have children myself, if I could get carried, and then she would support me in that, no matter how I identified. So I really seriously considered that, but then, like Yuval, also realised that actually what I needed to do there and then was transition. So, and that was definitely the right decision. I was only, 24 at the time or something. So. Yeah, and then 2 years on T, YouTube dropped a bombshell, showed me a vlog of a pregnant trans man. And I had definitely been aware of Thomas's story way before that, like 10 years previously or something, or maybe slightly less than 10 years. And I think that must have been somewhere in the back of my mind as well, because I recently read a quote of yours online, and it just resonated with me so profoundly, but I'd never known that idea must have been planted by you somewhere along the line, so that was really interesting. And then, yeah, that was like a 2-year process of asking myself, can I do this, should I do this? That was before I met anyone else that had gone through it in person, and then somewhere along the line then, I was already working at The Guardian and felt like I needed to try to share the story if I was going to do it, because because of the way it had been sensationalised in the press up until that point. But yeah, now living down on the coast, single dad. It's really hard, but it's really amazing, and yeah, it's just what I was meant to do.
Lovely, thank you. Brief intro to me then. So I've got a 9-year-old, so I was pregnant a while ago. I'm a filmmaker. I made a film called A Deal with the Universe that's playing tomorrow night. So it's interesting, Thomas, so your influence. There's something now, Ruth Pearce said something called possibility model once, and she might be at the moment thinking, oh, you need a footnote on that, because she perhaps didn't sort of coin the phrase, but the possibility model of when people see something, they realise it's possible, and they think, I could be like that. And in the film that we're showing this evening before Seahorse, we interviewed Rachel and I interviewed various trans guys pregnant, and there was one guy, he's really interesting, he said 10 years ago he didn't know that someone could transition from female to male. He'd heard about trans women, he didn't know it was possible. The first thing he ever saw that said it was possible was a documentary about Thomas Beatie, and then he was like, oh, right, okay, so it's like these 2 things all at once that he thought, not only can I be a man, I can be a pregnant man. So tell me more about that. Who influenced you? Who let you know that this was possible?
Oh, that's a really good question. I hadn't seen any physical representations of it. My heart told me. That's where I learned of it. I wanted to have a family. I knew that I wanted to be a father, and I had the ability to do it physically, so why the hell not? It was a big decision. My wife could not get pregnant. She had endometriosis and she had her uterus removed, so I figured rather than farm out the responsibility to someone else, I should be the one to do it, And so I did, and I didn't really think about the consequences. I had no idea on the face of this planet that the world would take a second look. I figured I would hide in my house, never emerge, and then out come a baby. It didn't work out that way. I actually got pregnant the first time around with an ectopic pregnancy, with triplets, and I lost the fetuses, obviously. And going to the hospital, it was rough because I was coming out as a trans man and pregnant, and the medical community didn't know what to think, And as far as HIPAA goes and privacy, that went out the window. I mean, it was coming back to me from neighbors and stuff. Are you pregnant? What? And I'm like, oh God, I better figure out what I'm going to say. Reporters started showing up on my doorstep, and I had no idea how to handle this legally, making sure that I was going to be listed as my children's father on their birth certificate. So then ensued my search to find answers, and here I am.
Well, and that resonates a bit with your story, Yuval, as I know it. Would you mind?
Yeah, so originally, also Israel is a small place, everybody's in everybody's business, and I thought the chances of me getting pregnant, being pregnant and having a baby and it not reaching the press was very slim, so I thought there would be a better plan to find people we wanted to work with originally and work with them and kind of do it in a respectful way. But unfortunately, my mother-in-law threatened to not be in touch with us if we did that, and so I got that, and I was right. When I was 26 weeks pregnant, Leary, who was a very active baby, decided not to move for one day. And after I tried all the regular eating chocolate lying on this side, lying on that side, I decided I better go and check what was going on. And I should have probably gone to the hospital. We lived in Tel Aviv. I should have gone to the hospital in Jerusalem, which was about an hour drive away, where I was known and I was treated, and they were really respectful. But we thought, oh, I'll just cross the road, go to the nearby hospital, everything will be fine. My doctor actually, she called up and prepared them for me coming. So we went, everything was fine. We went back, and then the day after, I got a phone call from the health reporter of the biggest paper in Israel, who had all the whole story, loads of details that she had absolutely no other way of knowing apart from people working in the hospital. And she asked me to cooperate with her, and I said I'd think about it, and and then we sort of tried to ask around friends that kind of worked in the media if they could somehow get the story buried, and I guess she heard about that, and the next day, which actually happened to be our first wedding anniversary, Louis just really wanted to make sure we never forgot it, we woke up to find full spread in the paper about my pregnancy. Now, it didn't have my name or my picture, because that would have been illegal, but it had any other detail, but it was really taken out of context. It was a really, really bad article. It had kind of quotes from a blog I wrote when I was 18 that were taken out of context, and it kind of made me, if I'd have read that article without knowing me, I'd have kind of probably come to the conclusion that I wasn't a very stable person. There was probably a very bad idea for me to have children, and yeah, it was really bad. And I felt bad about it. Also because it was about me, and it was a nightmare. That day I didn't answer 200 phone calls, and Matan, my partner, didn't answer about 100 phone calls. It was about 300 phone calls in that one day, and it was really crazy. So that was difficult. It was difficult on a personal level, and it was also really difficult I felt that let my community down. I felt that I was representing a community who's badly represented at the best of times in a really bad way, and it was just one more piece of really bad representation, yeah. So I found that quite difficult. And then after it came out, so obviously the media carried on chasing me for everybody wanted like the interview and picture and films and everything. And I don't like to credit myself too much, but I think I can say that I think very few people in Israel have managed to control the media like I did, because they did really want the story, and I said, fine, I'll get the story, I'll get the picture that you want, the big belly and whatever, but on my terms. And I think I really managed to switch the story around, and it turned out to be, I think, at that time, one of the most respectful articles ever written about transgender person in Israel. And I think a lot of good came out of the story eventually. I think it did a lot of good. I think a lot of people that didn't know trans was a possibility knew, and definitely people that didn't know trans pregnancy was a possibility. And yeah, and I was happy with it. I was a bit sorry I didn't do it originally, but you know, it is what it is. And then with Aria's pregnancy, it was the second. We knew it would be slightly less interesting than the first, but still interesting enough, and we didn't want to go through the same thing, so that time we already chose, Matan's mum came around, and we chose a person that we trusted to work with, and we did a film that at the time I felt was very good. I still feel it's good, but I think after seeing Freddy's film I kind of say, ooh, it could have been done better. But I guess, yeah, 7 years ago it was also a bit different, but yeah.
Lovely, thanks Yuval. Freddie, can you tell us more, because I mean, yours is a different story again. You're somebody who, before even becoming pregnant, this was something that you were going to document. Can you tell me more about your decisions and about...
Yeah, I spent the year prior to, well, I sort of decided that I would definitely pursue pregnancy as my route to sort of starting my family when I was living in Australia. So, and that had quite a big role, I would say, in that decision. Or it just, kind of a cliche, but I was so far away from home, it really put things in perspective. I had a very supportive boss, and when I told her what I felt I needed to do, she was like, well, we'll just get you a flight home then, I suppose. And she's now my kid's godmother. So that was amazing. And because I was in Australia feeling quite lonely, living in Sydney, I would go to the cinema a lot, and I'd always loved documentary, and I can remember a handful of films over the course of my sort of adult life or teenagehood as well, where I felt like a film actually changed my life, or like totally changed my opinion on something, blew my mind, like Why We Fight being an example, which is all about the military industrial complex, like, and so yeah, I was thinking about all this stuff of, wow, am I going to get pregnant? Like, that's kind of scary, but you know, having this perspective helped me feel like, yeah, quite clear about it. And I think around that time on YouTube there was suddenly a proliferation of people vlogging their own experiences, and this Facebook group that I found with hundreds of members was really helpful. So that, but also thinking, if I do that, then I felt like I had a responsibility to try to tell the story, like, you know, like Yuval says, because it's done so badly over and over and over again. I'm a journalist. I worked for a big newspaper, and I wouldn't say that it's you know, a newspaper that has its own problems when it comes to reporting on trans issues, like big time. It didn't so much then. This is like a couple of years ago. Things have changed quite rapidly in terms of wider understanding of how the British press is like failing us and just causing huge problems. At the time, I felt like I was in a very strong position to be able to tell a good story, and yeah, like literally that it was my responsibility to try to do that. Not that I would have done it if I found the idea completely horrifying, but I didn't know how to do it at all. I just felt like I should. I knew Orlando, who's the exec producer from my time working for Skaterstan in Afghanistan. He'd made a short film about this skate charity in Afghanistan. One of my colleagues was Charlie Phillips, who's like one of the most well-connected documentary not makers, but producers and people. Used to run Sheffield Doc Fest. Yeah, it's like when you know people like that, you have those conversations, and then people quickly get excited about the idea. And from the very beginning, we were all very much on the same page about certain ground rules, the tone, me being like the fact that I'm a key part of the team, but I'm not actually the filmmaker, was my choice. I didn't want that responsibility. I mean, I kind of wish that I was able to do that, but I just didn't feel like I was at that time. I needed to concentrate on the job in hand, of like actually doing it. So all that stuff that was quite complicated, you know, yeah, came off well.
I'm sort of curious, because one of the things that's come up in some of the conversations I've had with trans guys who are pregnant is the fear of the doorstep journalist. You know, the fear of like, I mean, that terrified me for a long time. It really terrified me, the idea of, because I remember when I think when my baby was 8 months old, one of the tabloids did there's sort of half-page advert appeared. It said, "Do you know the UK's first pregnant man?" And I started getting texts from friends saying, "There's a bounty on you." And actually my partner and I said, well, should we just claim the money if there's any money? Should we just sort of, you know. But then we were worried about being doorstepped. And then I remember for a while I sort of had to up my game. I'd be living in, you know, tracksuit bottoms like you do when you've got a small baby. And I was sort of, you know, dressing up a bit, you know. But that fear, I suppose, for me, there was a kind of, once my story was told, I felt an incredible sense of relief. It felt like, you know, sort of just, fuck it, running naked down the street. It was like, this is, you know, it's like, just that moment of madness. I don't know, did you feel any sort of...
I think, it's hard to say. I was really worried about that same thing, about being doorstepped, but, you know, even, I kind of worried about that it would happen when the film came out. I thought that would be the sort of trigger for people, because another thing I wanted to try to achieve was to make the film and you know, in other words, be pregnant and give birth in secret, like, as is such a common experience here. Like, I did want to share my story, but after the fact, we knew that the film wouldn't come out for at least a year, and that was kind of part of the agreement. But yeah, I used to lay awake sort of thinking, is my house secure enough? You know, I need to change the lock on the back gate and that kind of thing. But I think actually, like, and this is again what I could bring to it as a journalist, I had another suspicion that because I'd told my own story and because we'd done it in this way, journalists, they'd be a bit pissed off. They'd be like, oh, like, you know, that's not our story anymore. And actually what that sort of did was it backfired is too strong a term, but it has definitely had this effect of, I think, sort of decreasing interest, perhaps in the film in general, or in that story that I was trying to tell, because it's a little bit like if you try and do it by yourself. I don't know, Yuval, if this reflects your experience. If you try and do it yourself, even as a journalist, there's this sense of like, well, screw you then, like, we're not gonna, you know, it's not our story, we haven't really been able to do it on our terms, so we're gonna sort of sideline it slightly, or, and, you know, I think because the film isn't particularly sensationalist at all, or, you know, and therefore isn't necessarily seen as very commercial, it has, yeah, it's been an interesting journey where there's been suddenly so much less interest because it's not this, like, pregnant man, here are the belly pictures, here are all things people put, and you think, actually, we're not that interested after all. It's just a family, you know. So, which is a good thing ultimately for the community, but, you know, it's just, yeah, it's wrong-footed us a couple of times, I think.
Yeah, can I answer? I think, well, I'm referring to Israel because here I had a very different experience, and also I live in a small queer town, so it kind of, I think in Israel when it came public, it was a relief on one hand, because I think, it's funny, but kind of going around I was asking myself, like, what are people thinking? What are they assuming? It's just crossing the mind, isn't it? Then once I came out as pregnant, it was like, okay, people know, and then it kind of, I didn't have to mess with that so much. But on the other hand, I think when I started transitioning and passing as male, I sort of got male privilege of walking around anywhere and feeling safe, and I think I kind of lost that when I came out as trans and pregnant. And I think, again, Israel is quite a violent place, and it's not particularly safe for LGBT. I mean, like, people in Israel like to think it's safe for LGBTQs. It's maybe safe for white, gay men who very much fit in every other way, but it's not particularly safe. I didn't feel it was a safe place being trans, and I think I actually lost a lot of that sense of safety when I came out.
Can I bring it back to you? Actually, do you have anything on this? Because this is a very different story to you, because you were suddenly, I mean, you were doorstepped, and you were...
Yeah, I was doorstep before I even knew it. It was pretty crazy. I had reached out to the Advocate magazine to try to find answers and examples of other pregnant men and try to figure out the legal issues. And they asked me to write a first-person article about my story. They didn't really consider it anything big. They just printed it, and then from that point, just went, and everybody was on my doorstep. And it is damn hard to control the media. Like, they do what they want. They tell a story that they want, and if you don't give them what they want, they'll write it anyway, and they'll change the facts. And it was disheartening to see what was out there. I was giving birth to kittens. I was, from Mars. It was just like crazy. And a very deep part of me wanted to tell the story right, from my perspective, because nobody knew my family. Nobody knew why I did what I did and how I did it. And so I thought I was making the best decisions by holding out, talking to Oprah. I thought, everybody loves Oprah, Oprah's going to do it right, and she's going to be compassionate. And, I don't know, the fallout from that, maybe trans people didn't like it, maybe they did, I don't know. But I went on to Barbara Walters, and that was the hardest interview of my life. She grilled me for 4 hours under a heated lamp. Just kidding, but it felt like that. She was great though, because we talked about the legal issues. But I tried to be as respectful as I could in the media, picking and choosing where I went. But here in the UK, your guys' media is a little bit different. It's very sensational, and I was just on like all the tabloids out here, and I think a lot of people got the impression that I was I'm sorry, Susan, I was a media whore, and that hurts my feelings. Because I didn't do it to be famous or to make money, and people think I got paid large sums of money. I was paid $1 million from Oprah. I got a shirt, a hat, and a mug. That's what I got. $0 for any interviews. I did do a documentary that was picked up by a UK production company, and once you sign up doing that type of thing, you do give up some of your rights on how they're going to present the story. And I trusted them, and I felt like, it wasn't a bad documentary. If I could do it again, maybe I might have done things differently. But yeah, that's all process.
So I just want to say something about that, and this isn't sort of in direct response to that, but just to say that I think there's absolutely no shame at all in making money from our stories. It's not like pregnant trans men are rolling in money. We're not rich, you know what I mean? And we've got, and we're like, we have our babies, and then we're like, anyone who's had a baby, we're sort of, unemployable. If we can make a bit of cash as a side hustling documentary filmmaking, I think that's absolutely... I was going to ask something about, and it's something coming back to something you said at the start, Yuval. I think you said something about a responsibility to the community, a kind of response, and also I think, and you said this as well, Freddie, and this idea of, I suppose, representing, the minute we're sort of in the media, we become representatives. There are so few transmasculine people in the media that we suddenly become, Tell me a bit more about that, or responses from the trans community, or about that. Was there pressure to be this sort of spokesperson?
Do you really want to talk about that? No, there was an enormous pressure for me to feel like I needed to say the right thing and do the right thing, because I understood that other trans people were looking at me, and I'm really sorry to say this, but the community cast me away. They completely rejected me, and I heard the most horrific things from the community itself, the LGBT community. This is the first trans event I've ever been invited to. This is the first time I've ever met another trans guy. Thank you. It was hard, and I was trying to understand why there was that reaction, and I'm still trying to figure it out today. I don't know, maybe you guys can tell me. But I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people thought I did it just to get my face out there and to make money. And that's the funniest thing on earth, because you don't have a baby to make money. Have you heard about how much it costs to raise a child? And I got 4 of them. Yeah, so it wasn't that at all. I wanted to do it right. And it would have been awesome to get the support from the community, especially when it came to the legality of it all. Fighting for it in the court system. I know we're probably going to talk about that in a bit. But I think another thing was that the trans community saw me, the way the media pitched it was that I'm the first pregnant man. You know, that's what you read everywhere. And I'll tell you, the media did check my credentials. They said, let me see your birth certificate, let me see your driver's license, your passport, all that. Oh, wow, you are male. Well, this is the first time we've ever heard of this. I mean, there's been other trans men who have given birth, for sure. But, you know, their birth certificates didn't say male. And so they dubbed me as the world's first pregnant man, because from a legal perspective, I was. And I went on to fight a very important court battle and won that right to say that now I'm legally validated as a man having given birth. And I think that's a great step for trans mankind.
So I'm just going to sort of, the question as well to Freddy and Yuval, this sort of, you know, and I'm really interested in the timeline, I suppose, of responses from the trans community, because I remember, so Matt Rice, who we saw on the screen, wearing the very big jeans, he talks about himself, the jeans, that's not me being me. So he's a friend of mine, and he was talking about, you know, I mean, he had no mainstream attention, but he had lots of very worried trans men online at the time. And I think part of the worry was this idea that somehow a secret had been given away, and somehow it was the secret that people hadn't all had bottom surgery. And that was the big sort of thing that he'd revealed by becoming pregnant, that this was a possibility, and people felt unsafe. They felt that this thing that no one wanted to talk about. And I'm wondering if that's sort of still... But it seems to me that we're on a timeline of where the trans community has changed really rapidly from your experiences. And I'm just wondering if you two could share any experiences of...
I mean, I definitely remember worrying about the community reaction and not having realised that was a thing that didn't need to worry about it necessarily, but I think the biggest thing that's driven me through this whole experience is, like, people think it's brave, but I think I've actually just been really naive. And I remember the moment when I sort of had this realisation of, like, oh, trans men might be really angry with me. God, I hadn't... Jesus, like, that's terrifying, and again, that kept me awake sort of many nights. And that was born of seeing the odd video, mostly on YouTube, I would say, where comment sections tend to be awful anyway, so, you know, why pay attention? But it does hurt when you see people that you would otherwise feel like you could relate to in a community with saying awful things, you know, about not trans enough, or you know, this isn't how you do it, and this is gross, and then there's all sorts of all the Facebook groups. I mean, I think things are changing for the positive, but I think also there's a representation of any opinion you can think of, it'll be out there kind of thing. So you get these groups on Facebook of, you know, for real trans men, who, and often it's followed by something like who love women, or, you know, we are definitely perpetuating misogyny and sexism and patriarchy very efficiently, it feels like sometimes. But I want to also call out, like, in this country in particular, I would say NHS gender identity clinics. You know, how can we expect the community to move forward and accept guys like us if we are still being told by our doctors that testosterone will make you infertile, and that if you want to have a conversation about pregnancy, well, basically just leave, because that's what I was told. I tried to have a conversation with my consultant about, I've heard about this thing, I was really cagey about it, I wasn't going all gung-ho, and I was kind of seeking his approval, I suppose, in a way, and actually just sort of seeking support through that process that I thought I might go on. And he sort of turned around and said, oh, I've never heard of that happening. This is, you know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago or something, and then he just discharged me because I wasn't on the pathway. So I think, you know, that's not the be all and end all, there are other ways to get medical support, but I think we've got a long way to go.
I have two things to say about, like, the trans community's response. I think the first thing is, response is like, you're not man enough and men can't be pregnant. I've got all of that from people in the trans community, but I can see a big difference between my first pregnancy, which was almost 9 years ago and how it is now. And I think if you speak to the younger generation of trans people, a lot of them are even considering it. I mean, it's definitely an option now, which I think is really amazing, and I think it's because of us who have been out there and made it an option. So you still get that, but you get less of it. I think in Israel, there was a bit of, there were people in the trans community that weren't so happy because the society in Israel is very, very focused on having kids, and everybody's under a lot of pressure to have kids, and I think trans people in a way felt they were kind of freed from that, and then when it became optional, that I know of quite a few people that don't want kids, when they were planning kids, and then suddenly their parents came to them and said, "Ooh, there was this trans guy on the news that had kids, now you couldn't have kids too, now I expect you to have kids," and that kind of put a whole load more pressure on that's, I suppose, a bit specific.
I guess I also just want to say that I think this is a bigger issue with queer youth in general in terms of whether young people who are LGBTQ feel able to imagine themselves being parents in any way. Like, I don't think it's just an issue of like trans male pregnancy. Exactly, they imagine their futures. I remember I heard Tristan Reese, who I'm sure we've all heard of, on a podcast recently saying that studies generally tend to show that trans youth don't see themselves becoming parents and therefore don't preserve their fertility if they're faced with that decision. And that's not because they necessarily, you know, there's a whole load of reasons why that would be happening, and they feel maybe a pressure or you know, or they just can't imagine it. And then that is then juxtaposed with a majority of older trans people who didn't feel they had enough information in the past and wish they had preserved their fertility. So that there's something obviously going wrong there if those two things are sort of in opposition to each other. But I think it's a much bigger issue than just trans men.
Great stuff. Can I ask you a question, Susan? Can I ask you, because one of the things, and this is particularly around, I suppose it sort of is some of the stuff that I'd read around your film as well, Freddie, you know, and I don't read comments, you know, except sometimes I do, and like everybody, and I suppose one of the things that got me, and it gets me about all of the sort of commentators, and this is the particular one that will always make me go, oh, is when people say, it's like this idea that we're somehow going to deceive our children. So, and I think I remember a bit particularly about you, it was like, you know, this guy, he's going to bring up this child to think that it has no mother, blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, hold on a minute, so this, what, you mean this guy that's made a film about it? You mean this guy, you mean that this guy that's on the cover of the Guardian Weekend, you mean that guy is going to pretend, you know, this guy that's, you know, and it's sort of, I suppose it's that idea that we're tricksters. You know, that we're somehow kind of going to try and, you know, trick our kids. So I suppose it's great because here we have a kid. So Susan, I'm just wondering, when did you know that you'd sort of come from your dad's tummy?
I guess I found out, he has always told me that I never saw any different than any other child. I felt special that I was one kid at the time, and now there are 4 of us, but like one kid at the time that I had a dad, and I have a dad and a mom, and I call my dad, even if he did give birth to me. I guess I found out when I was able to understand that kind of stuff.
It's really neat to hear her talk. This is the first time she's getting to express. I have no idea what's going to come out of her. But basically, she saw me pregnant with her brothers, so it's always been her normal. And in fact, I mean, she doesn't remember this, but we had to show her pictures of her mother pregnant to prove that women actually give birth as well. And one time we're out in public, it was so funny, there's this guy with this really big beer belly walking in. Susan loves babies, and she ran after him, baby inside. But yeah, she doesn't know what trans is, you know. I'm just her dad. I'm a man, and you know, she doesn't see it any other way. But I've shown her albums. I actually wrote a book for her. I dedicated it to her, and she just started reading it on the plane ride over here. So I'm really excited about it. It's got some adult situations, but you know, we'll talk through these things. But I just wanted to know all of it, and I'm so proud of her.
How about
Yeah, my kids. My kids are very annoying. They don't call me dad. They don't call the other dad. They refuse to call us their dad. Yeah, actually, it is a little bit of an issue. I think if there wasn't an issue, it wouldn't be an issue. But I think sometimes people say, so are you the mum, are you the dad, what do they call you? And kind of having a child that calls you dad kind of validates that. But I don't have that, but you know, that's just how it is. Actually, my eldest gave a really nice explanation to why he doesn't call us dads a few months ago. He said, there's a lot of dads, but there's only like one of you, which is nice. But yeah, I mean, it's never been a secret. They know where they've come from. I mean, again, from when they can understand. They've seen me pregnant. My eldest was at my second's birth. I'm not sure he remembers it, but he was there. They were offered to be at the third birth, but they decided not to wake up. Yeah, I mean, it's almost disappointing how much it's a non-issue. Like, you know, you kind of ask them about it, and, you know, and it's just kind of like, what do you want from me? You know, it's not interesting. Well, you know, like we went to Trans Pride in Brighton, and I said, you know, do you want to meet other kids that, you know, the dad gave birth to them? And they were like, why? Why should we want that? Why? So, yeah. So, very boring.
Yeah, actually, this has just started coming up. I mean, yeah, he's just turning 2, so, but he's just had a language explosion. So that's really interesting and a little bit like, nerve-wracking. But it's very sweet. He loves reading, he loves books, and all of his books are on his level, so he'll always pick one to bring over. And one of his absolute favourites is What Makes a Baby. Has anyone come across the Corey Feinberg, is it? If anyone knows them, like, oh my god. In the beer, because yeah, so my kids has recently started pointing to all the pictures and saying egg, sperm, bodies, you know. So I mean, that is just, I feel so grateful to be doing this at this time, and being able to buy all these books. And yeah, I guess we'll just talk about it, and then it'll just be his normal, as everyone, you know, that phrase. Yeah, because we don't live in a town where there's anyone else, and no other Seahorse dads. And there's lots of older gay men, but not much of a kind of queer community, I suppose. So, yeah.
Yeah, because that, I suppose that what you're doing there, this is brilliant, because this is, I remember when I was pregnant, my friend had 2 quite small twins, and she was explaining to them about me being pregnant, and it was great, because she said, oh, well, you know, when Jason was born, and she explained that I had eggs, and they just kind of got it from the mechanics of eggs. And I mean, I told my child, I think, from just sort of always tried to talk about it until a few years ago, and my kid said, you're always boasting about being trans. So I'm sort of, you know, but I'm another one who, you know, I get called Jason, you know, and yeah, I don't get that either.
And then there's the book Mr. Seahorse by Eric Carle. Have you read that one? That one's great. The male seahorse, and it introduces other male fish in the sea that have that type of role. But that's what the kids read too. So that was a neat imagery for them.
What I'd like to do then is, shall we do the 5-minute and then question thing now? Let's do it. So if everyone has